The first 17 years of the 21st century has been turbulent ones, and here in the West, arguably defined by two major events. The first one happened in September 2001 when two planes were flown into the World Trade Towers in New York. Events that have changed the way the world is configured in terms of its political and military life. The second thing, and one which underlines thinking on the topic of austerity, is this. 14 years ago, a British bank called Northern Rock failed its followers in a fairly spectacular way. And for the first time since the Great Depression, there were queues round the block of investors wanting to get their money out of this bank. Sometime later, the Lehman Brothers in the United States in 2008 were suddenly exposed as a community to a whole set of languages that we'd never heard before. Suddenly, some of us knew what a subprime mortgage was, which really meant lending money to people who were never going to be able to pay it back. There were all sorts of conversations about what on earth had gone on in both the US and the UK, where debts could not be repaid, where there was a run on the banks creating a situation of enormous turmoil. Was the whole economic system going to collapse down our ears? Following that, there was a desire to bail the banks out, and quantitative easing was developed as an idea that had most of us never hearing of this before. The Bank of England played a key role in this process, and lots of people severely criticised in the banking world. In the midst of the financial turbulence and fear and anxiety, governments moved rapidly to try and reassure the populace, and a decade of austerity was ushered in. Martin van der Weyer reflects on the enduring effects of this crisis. Some 14 years on, looking back after a decade, he can be grateful for the bailout interventions that shored it all up at a moment of catalysm. But can society also observe the lingering and deep unfairness of the longer term of recovery? Ultra-low interest rates that won't rise above inflation anytime soon mean blameless savers face continuing negative returns on cash deposit. Yet the impact of the quantitative easing on the asset prices has made people rich in equities and real estate, and they are richer than ever than before. Bank shareholders have seen no rebound in their investment, while bank executives go on collecting fat packages. Low earners have been squeezed by austerity, while high earners have not. High street banks are endlessly tied up in precautionary red tape. All from this, while banks themselves, despite the precautions for their customers, have been revealed to be up to their necks in scandal after scandal. The lesson for the next time is there is no such thing as natural economic justice. So there's a question to be considered about whether or not austerity is moral. Firstly, Christians should be widening their definition. The Bible has many pretty negative things to say about debt that we don't want to be getting on and listening in. The Bible and Christian theologians throughout the church history have been saying that debt's a bad thing because you become a slave to the person to whom you owe money. So it seems to me that austerity as a model, despite everybody saying it doesn't work, has had modest success. For example, in 2010, 2011, the British national debt was 151 billion. Just 2 or 3 years later, it's gone down to 50 billion pounds. Now, those figures are eye-watering, but it does seem like progress in the right general direction. So from a Christian point of view, knowing what the Bible says about debt and saving and being a debtor, one thinks it's absolutely right to pay off debt because one doesn't want a future of generations to be saddled with all of this repayment. If we care for our children and our grandchildren, we don't want them to inherit so many challenges that Greece, for example, were facing. There has been enormous incapacity to address the dreadful question of, is austerity immoral? The poorest people in our society are struggling with the payment of this austerity debt. Why has homelessness increased on such a dramatic scale? Why are food banks overflowing? Not with food, but with people who need the food. And the difficulty for Christians is this: if one says something about austerity, people just assume you're being right-wing. And if you say it's a tragedy and that the poor are oppressed, then you're being told you're being left-wing. Our political system of right and left seems to be completely broken, and our dilemma won't be solved by drifting into political matches from either side. The Bible brings a unique perspective, says a think tank discussion, to some of these things, and we need to be saying that it is a broken system, but not in a negative way, but saying let's affirm the need to be honourable with future generations, and let's make sure the burden of austerity payments fall on the rich and not on the poor. That's not a left-wing thing or a right-wing thing to say. It's a Christian thing to say about the challenges. So, is austerity moral? Our think tank group says the answer is yes, as a theoretical construct, but no in terms of its impact. We as a society would be judged by our care of the poorest and not the most broken and hurting. The Christian message is this: although he, Jesus, was rich, he became poor. He became incarnated, fleshed out on this planet, on earth, so that broken people like me, like you, could discover a whole new way of living and engage these questions with passion. We should not allow ourselves simply to have a faith that makes us feel better in a good service on a Sunday. We should refuse to settle for that and hunger after a faith that is transforming enough in our lives to genuinely want to be Jesus to those with nothing and even less than nothing, both in our own communities and around the world.